up to the fence, right? That's where we've seen all the action every night. That's where the fighting starts. And I wanted to see that transition from the peaceful rally to the tear gas in the fires. And that's exactly what I saw. And here's how it played out for me. Around 11 p.m., about half of the crowd had left. The lights and the lasers came out. They started shining on the courthouse and lighting up all those broken glass windows on the building from night after night of rocks and BBs and fireworks. Next came the actual fireworks, the same kind that the kids love on the 4th of July. I mean, they're loud, they're bright, they make you jump, but they have burned officers and protesters when they go off too close. This all went on for about 30 minutes, the lights and the fireworks and all that kind of stuff. And the feds did nothing. They didn't do anything. I mean, nothing at all. It seemed to me for a while that it was almost like no one was home. I actually started to think maybe tonight would end without any real fireworks. Until people started climbing the fence. First, a few people straddled the top of the fence and got the crowd chanting. Then, someone hopped the fence entirely and started yelling profanities at the building before climbing back into the crowd. People got braver and braver. You see here, these are two men who hopped over the fence and started running around inside, causing the crowd to cheer. The federal officers did not like this. They did not like it at all. And it was after that, it was the first time that we heard from them. See, one of their concerns, of course, has been fires burning too close to the building, or even worse, violent protesters getting inside. So after that, they got onto the loudspeakers and they gave a warning. But people kept climbing. And then they declared an unlawful assembly. They said it just one time. Honestly, it was hard to even hear given all the chanting that was going on, but there was no doubt that they meant it, though you couldn't really tell right away. In fact, there was kind of a lull. Nothing happened for a moment. People started talking to each other. I pulled out my camera and started messing with some of the buttons on there when all of a sudden it started quickly, like a flash. Literally, the gas canisters came flying into the crowd. I wasn't recording at the time. Honestly, I was stunned into some type of stupor that you don't really want to admit after a moment like that. You wish you were more composed. But one of the canisters landed right at my feet. Someone ran over and kicked it away. People screamed to put on a gas mask. I scrambled for mine. I'd practiced putting it on before I went out there, but in the moment, in the heat of it all, it was a lot different. The gas makes your face feel hot and flush, your eyes well up, your lungs tighten. It's kind of like taking a hit of a cigarette for the very first time in your life. Your body rejects it violently, and everyone was panicking. I didn't see really even where the canisters came from, if you can believe it. I assumed they came from the doors of the courthouse, but by the time the smoke cleared, the officers were nowhere to be seen, and the doors were closed. Now, the protesters without a gas mask or without goggles, they went running for cover. They were in the back of the park coughing. I saw some of them throwing up. But the protesters who were dressed for battle barely budged. A few dozen people in the crowd are protected from head to toe. They have on gas masks and helmets, body armor and padding, heavy coats and gloves, shields made from thick wood and thick plastic. And honestly, my very first reaction right there experiencing it was that the feds took that situation from a 2 to a 10. And if you were out there chanting in a t-shirt and a COVID mask, it would certainly feel that way. If you got hit with pepper spray and pepper balls and tear gas, it would be like a traumatic assault. But for the people in that protective gear, that gas is only a cloud in front of their vision, and the pepper balls barely sting, or so I'm told. Those people didn't run. They formed ranks and they shrugged it off. Now, this all happened around midnight, and the whole song and dance begun. They went back and forth for hours. Each time, each side would become more and more aggressive. Eventually, rioters started small fires behind the fence, and that's when the officers decided to enter the crowd and clear the streets up close and personal. This next video isn't mine. It was shot by an independent journalist named Corey Elliott, and it shows what the end of the night looked like.
Did you just really fire at your own guy?
Sweep around, there's more. I'm on this. you want to move, I'm on this.
Okay, so what's my take? After one night, 60 days in, if you ask me, everyone's concerns about what they're seeing downtown are true on both sides. Do some of the protesters provoke the federal officers to act? Absolutely. Do the feds respond with extreme measures that affect the entire crowd of people, most of whom haven't broken a single law? Yes to that too. Did I find that last video that we showed you disturbing? Yes, I did. It's jarring enough to capture the whole world's attention, and they're all looking at Portland right now, and it needs to stop. But how? That video was shot around 3:30 in the morning, 4 hours into slowly escalating violence. I did wonder, I honestly did, I did wonder what would happen. What would have happened if nobody would have climbed those fences, if they wouldn't have jumped over them and run around, if the crowd would have stuck to chanting and blocking streets. But I'm not quite ready to have an opinion on that one just after one night. But I do know this, something has to give. I definitely feel more qualified talking about this now after going down and seeing it with my own eyes. But you don't have to see it in person to know that if we continue like this, something tragic is bound to happen. Today, Oregon's top prosecutor gave us an update on how many people the feds have arrested just this weekend. 22 people face a variety of charges, from assault to failure to obey orders to operating a drone in restricted airspace. That makes a total of 83 federal arrests in the city, most of whom are locals. And again, Oregon's U.S. Attorney Billy Williams condemned nightly violence and in the process gave us our quote of the day. He said, "It is absolutely destroying the soul of our city, and I totally understand the sentiment, and that the rest of the city wants the city's soul to get back where it belongs, at Kelly's Olympian, right before closing time." So earlier this month, a Navy veteran became a symbol of the Portland protests when U.S. Marshals beat him repeatedly with a baton and pepper sprayed him in the eyes. And now a similar story is playing out from over the weekend. Here's some video. It might have already been making the rounds on your Facebook timeline. It shows Richard Hastie yelling at federal officers in Portland. The Vietnam veteran says that he wasn't a threat in his opinion. Officers still sprayed him in the eyes though with pepper spray. We talked to Hastie today and asked him to walk us through how he portrays the events now.
I was telling the police why I was there because they're branding us as thugs, hoods, violent anarchists and all that stuff. So it's important to me just to stand my ground and say this is why this Vietnam veteran is here, and that's why I said what I said. And I was just exercising my First Amendment rights, and all of a sudden a police officer came walking up from behind me, and he just sprayed me directly in the eyes, and then he just kept moving.
Now, on the off chance that you thought the federal agencies might actually back down a little bit in the face of all these non-stop protests we're seeing, it sounds like the opposite is happening. Today, OPB reported the Trump administration has deployed another 100 federal officers. Officially, they're here to protect federal buildings downtown. Now, here on the story, we like to recommend pieces of journalism that we really think are worth your time. And last week, we recommended this op-ed in the Washington Post. It was written by Reverend E.D. Mondonay. He's the president of Portland's chapter of the NAACP. His view is, in so many words, that the protests have been hijacked by white people and that they're missing the message. He explained a bit more about what he meant today.
It's turning this spectacular moment of a revolution into a spectacle. So I think that we have to remember at all costs, the message needs to be central. Black Lives Matter, and not just the Black Lives Matter, how do those lives matter, and what do we do in terms of coming to their aid? As a matter of fact, I want to thank you for taking the tear gas. I want you to thank you for showing up night after night to show the world that you are passionate about your brothers and sisters. My heart and my soul go out to you. However, stand behind us the way that we desire you to stand behind us. We're in this fight together. And the only way we're going to win this fight is together.
It is important to note that not everyone agrees with Mondonay. A little later in the show, we're going to hear from an activist who supports protesters using a diversity of tactics to get their message across. If somebody is infected with COVID, how many more people will they infect? A very smart person gives us the answer. And a lot of you want to know why Mayor Wheeler just doesn't implement another curfew to curb the protests, because, you know, the last one was so effective. That's sarcasm, by the way.
This is actually our fourth event that we've done out here. The Gateway District is a neighborhood where many Black, Indigenous, and brown people have been displaced to due to the gentrification that has taken place in Portland's traditionally Black neighborhoods. The purpose of these events is to get people more involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and to draw attention to the rest of the marches that are happening in our city. We want to engage all of Portland, not just the folks in downtown.
The reason this started is because of Black Lives Matter and that movement, and that's the most important thing that we need to continue to focus on. I think that diversity of tactics is valid. I think that the federal response is entirely overreactive. I think that people are just trying to protect themselves and protect their rights, and they're doing that in any way they know how to do.
All right, welcome back to The Story. I'm Dan Haggerty. If you're just popping on right now, I spent the first half of the show talking a lot about my firsthand experience of covering the protests and riots last night that happened in downtown. So if you're interested to hear my words, if you're, again, just popping on, we have the whole thing up on the KGW YouTube channel. Of course, we stream this show live every night. You can find it on my Facebook page. It's also why we are in this new studio that is about 1,000 degrees. You can't tell that, but if you see sweat dripping down my face, you'll know why. And yeah, we're working on it. Give us some time. This is day one. But keep reaching out to us. Again, you can use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com. Please stay involved in the conversation. It helps drive all of our coverage. I actually want to read a question right now that we've been getting a lot. This one comes from Michael. He emailed me, why doesn't Mayor Wheeler just declare a 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. curfew for downtown? That way, the peaceful demonstrators will have plenty of time to peacefully protest, and everybody will know that they have to be off the streets by a reasonable established time. Then anybody who remains thereby will knowingly accept the risk of non-lethal force and or arrest. We got a ton of other questions in our inbox just like this one. To answer it, let's go back to the beginning. When the protests first started, Portland implemented a curfew for everyone to get off the streets at a certain time. It only lasted a few days before the mayor quickly gave up on curfews, and now we've seen 2 months of protests. So how did we get here? Protests started in Portland just a few days after George Floyd was killed by a police officer in Minneapolis. The night of Friday, May 29th, we saw the first destruction downtown, with people smashing windows and causing major damage to businesses. Some people also broke into the Justice Center and set fires inside. Mayor Ted Wheeler enacted a citywide curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. That curfew lasted a few nights, but it didn't really work. Demonstrators stayed on the streets after dark, and smaller groups continued to engage in violent and destructive behavior. Police arrested lots of people, but that didn't seem to stop anyone from showing up downtown. In a press conference on June 2nd, Wheeler said the curfew wasn't effective and decided not to extend it. Commissioner Joanne Hastie told OPB that the curfew was having the opposite impact we were wanting to have. So the short answer is, Portland already tried putting a curfew in place, but it didn't make a difference. And that's how we got here. All right, let's talk about COVID for a second. I know this episode so far has been a barrel of laughs, but I'm going to have to be a downer a little bit right now because Multnomah County has a lot of work to do on the COVID-19 front. Today, health officials, they told us that the virus is widespread across the county, probably at its highest levels ever. Mostly east of the Willamette, but making its way into neighborhoods on the west side as well. County Health Officer Jennifer Vines also said Latinx communities are the most disproportionately affected. After all, they only make up about 10% of Portland's populations, but they're getting hit pretty hard by COVID. The county made a few other problematic announcements. Last week, Multnomah County saw an average of 65 new cases a day, and the average age is dropping. Now people ages 10 to 19 are showing the highest relative rate of positivity. Basically, that means that that group is not tested as often as other groups, but their positivity rates are very high. They're also running into people not cooperating with contact tracers, but they do have a better idea of where some of the spikes are coming from.
Several 4th of July gatherings, a large family pool party, someone who attended a company conference with 150 other people, getting a condo with 7 other individuals, a group camping trip, and an engagement party. So those are just some examples of where we are finding people potentially transmitting the virus. Still almost 2/3, 62% of our cases are not traced to a known source. We are starting to see less cooperation from individuals and employers. So as an example, someone living with several friends doesn't care to provide contact information for their roommates. They say, I'll let them know. So we're still putting in place supports for isolation and quarantine, and we're hoping that as word gets out about those supports, that might change people's attitudes in the coming weeks around their case interviews and identification of contacts.
I'm sure you've seen some of our reporting on the difficulties and kind of the pitfalls of contact tracing so far. In fact, the county's head of communicable diseases actually recommended that maybe you should start helping that process by keeping track on your calendar of the people who you are in touch with. She said anybody that you spend more than 15 minutes with and you're within 6 feet of, they're considered a contact, whether you're wearing a mask or not. And she dropped some science explaining how an infected person can lead to more cases very, very quickly.
So what you can imagine is if one person who's sick infects fewer on average than one other person, eventually the disease will just naturally die out of the population because it's not spreading as much as it's being limited. If one person on average infects 2 or 3 or 4 people, you can imagine that after a number of days, there's an exponential increase. So what we've seen locally, our rough estimate, the most accurate we can get, is that probably since about mid-May, when we started to have an increase in cases, we're at about 1.5. So on average, that means that for every one person who's infected, they're probably spreading it to another 1.5 people. And you can see by that we are going to continue to grow cases more and more.
Now, the county said that they were able to actually trace 62% of our cases that we've seen here to known sources. There's a group of teachers in Oregon, and they're calling to not have schools open in person when school comes back around. And today they took that fight to Salem. Kristen Severance first introduced us to this group last week, and they told her that their push for 14 days with no new cases is gaining some traction.
Looks like we're starting to head out.
Ian Maurer and hundreds of Oregon educators met in the Salem parking lot for a car caravan protest.
14 days, no new cases.
Written on their cars were messages like, "I can't teach if I'm dead," "What happened to database decisions?" and "I don't want to choose between my life or my job."
The point is just to draw attention to our cause. 14 days of no new cases. We are really concerned about the safety of our students, the safety of educators, and the safety of the families that we all go back to.
Once in Salem, they drove around the Capitol building, honking and demanding school not open until there are 14 days of no new cases per county. Veteran teacher in the Reynolds School District, Tom Beeman, pulled over to talk to us.
It's not safe for students, and it's not safe for staff. There's too many cases being added each day, and we don't have enough ICU beds in the state available for the explosion that will happen if we meet face-to-face in the schools.
What do you say to people who have said that's impossible? If you demand 14 days, no new cases, school may never open up in person.
I think that it is possible. If you look around the state, there have been some counties without 14 days or with 14 days of no new cases. If you look around the world, there are a lot of other countries who have this under control.
The Facebook group that Maurer helps run has grown to more than 12,000 Oregon educators and parents. Some teachers don't agree with the push. When asked during our KGW Sunrise Extra show if teachers want to teach online or in person, kindergarten teacher Lori answered, "Absolutely back in the classroom. I teach kindergarten. How do you teach 5-year-olds online who didn't finish preschool?" And the CDC has also recently strongly pushed for in-person classes.
There are some teachers who have said they want to go back. They want to be back in in-person classes and they feel like they can do it. What do you say to them?
There will be some people who disagree with our cause, but I'm really in this with solidarity with my teachers who are in some high-risk categories. I'm 30, I'm healthy, but I have a baby at home. And I have colleagues who are older, who have other pre-existing health conditions. And so maybe it's not me who's going to get severely ill. but it's going to be somebody who I work with and someone who I care about. And that's what drives me to be here today.
All right, thanks to Kristen for that report. I'm looking through some comments and questions right now. When we come back, we'll address them. Keep writing in. Use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. We'll see you to finish the story next. All right, let's talk about comments. Bill Buda wrote in and said, with KGW isolating you, it sounds to me like KGW believes that protests spread COVID. Now, of course, we've been doing reports from the very beginning saying that there has been a lot of evidence showing that there haven't been any mass outbreaks linked directly to protests, and a lot of the thoughts have been because it's outside in open air and people wear masks. That doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot catch COVID when you are at a protest. It's only not being looked at as a hotspot for mass spreading of the virus. We're still going to be very careful and safe, the same way you would be if you went to the grocery store or went out and did anything else. I don't want to infect other people, and people have to come here to work. They shouldn't have to think about me going to protest or doing anything where I'm putting myself at any potential risk and then coming back here. So if you have more questions about that, Bill, just go ahead and email me about it. I'm happy to talk to you about it. We talked about the war veteran who was sprayed in the face earlier by the pepper spray, and I got something from Lynn Lincoln, and she said, that's an old acquaintance. I pronounce his name Mike Hastie. It's Mike Hastie. So apologies to Mike and anybody else if I mispronounced the name. And then lastly, we got something writing in. Somebody said, this is Lady Helpish on Twitter, and said, asked, are you going to be coming out to the protests again? Well, it was a lot of work to build this whole situation here. It feels kind of foolish to do all this for just one night. Plus, I'm a journalist after all. So thanks for being with us tonight. We appreciate it as always. Keep the comments coming. I want to hear everything you have to say, whether it has to do with the protest or any of the other massive world-altering, life-altering events that are happening in our world right now, from COVID to the economy to just let me know. Hashtag HeyDan. Find me on Facebook or Instagram. Stay with my accounts as well. If we head back out to the protest, of course, I will be keeping it live out there. See you back here next time on The Story.
I believe that we need all forms of protest. A protest doesn't work unless it's disruptive, and it costs the city money. We're coming out here, we're making noise in people's neighborhoods, we're disrupting people's businesses, we're calling them out of their houses, we're waking them up at night downtown. They are dealing with some pretty serious military presence. So what those protesters are doing is very courageous and brave, in my opinion, and I support all of them 100%.